open the floor now for questions.
Good morning. I am Colonel Susan Siratha, Sri Lankan Army. As far as US policy in countering violent extremism and terrorism is concerned, there is a policy which says that, that we would not have any dialogue whatsoever, any conversation with terrorists or extremists. Now here we talk about public diplomacy. On the other hand, we talk about soft power. Now where do we apply this? When it comes to certain other countries, US say that, okay, as for the LTT in the Sri Lankan context, they would say that, okay, don't resort to violence and dialogue, don't resort to violence, and what you are left with is the dialogue. So resort to dialogue and pacify all the conflict that you are in. So when it comes to the US interest, when they are protecting US interests, they go for hard power. There is no application of soft power, public diplomacy. Now we are talking of, anything is not applicable. So why that double approach? Or it's like a double standard approach. So that's something that we always thinking, why the US? Of course we understand, these are all strategies. We are living in a world where the strategies are working, not the good and bad. Not the good and bad. I really understand, we all really understand what we are talking about here, all the strategies. Strategies must work out. But as far as this, if you are really looking to counter or diffuse this terrorism or the violent extremism, we have to have a best narrative. In a best narrative, we could have two approaches. One is the countering. They are in the physical form. They are military actions. They are violence. And on the other hand, we can have another approach, which is the psychological approach, where you open up a dialogue. There you have the ideological battle, where we exchange ideas. What's the problem of you? And how do you see us? How our views works and all that. So that is the front that must be open. But the only thing that, we have been always done, till up to now, we have been adopting a very traditional way of approach to all these problems. We never give up opportunity for dialogue. But here we talk about soft power, public diplomacy, and so on. But it's only confined to this lecture hall or whatever we are talking about. It is only confined to our educational perspective. But it doesn't go beyond that. So why it is that? So best narrative should have two approaches. One is the dialogue, where you have the soft power skill, in whatsoever we have the technology, we can use the technology, we can have email exchange, we can use it even in person, there can be dialogues that can be open, and on the other hand, while taking account. And other thing we must understand, it's a strategy. Even talking to your opponent, your aggressor, your adversary is also a strategy. There you collect information, intelligence, his behavior, intention, and so on. So it must be used. So this is the weakest part of the mankind. And as for US, I think it is the US-American ego. Because they don't want to talk to others. But they advocate others, okay, you have dialogue. And there's one. The second point I would like, because I am very critical on these issues and all that, I'm an unconventional thinker. Because the thing is that these things are, I think, they're created by certain elements. If I specifically mention the CIA, behind this, making these terms, the terrorisms, and making to protect their US interests. So whenever these things happen, they want to. It's kind of a destabilization process. In order to stabilize, you have a stabilization process. You have the opportunities there. On the one hand, you destabilize the situation of the world. On the other hand, you have the stabilization process where you have the opportunities open. So that is one thing. The next point is that what I'm trying to say that, while destabilizing this thing, you can promote your own ideals like democracy, freedom, and good governance, or whatever you are talking about, what you are standing for. So on the one hand, you have to make sure that the world go through this process. Because for you to understand peace, the best thing is that let people undergo war. One good example, before 1980, the Sri Lanka never experienced a prolonged conflict, other than a brief spell of insurgency in 1971, which was crushed within 6 months of time. The people never thought of a peace was an important aspect. It was never in the agenda of the politicians as well. But after 1980, having gone through 30 years of conflict, we now understand the importance of conflict. So likewise, if you want to introduce peace, definitely the world has to go through war. So simply I apply this to the US strategy also. If you want the world to embrace your ideals like democracy, freedom, peace and all that, let the world go through the war. So you create war, you create terrorism and fundamentalism, whatever it is, and subverting the beliefs of the people, and there you enter with your stabilization process. This is how I view, because I am not critical, but I'm generally unconventional thinker to see the conventional thinking. Over to the panel.
Thank you very much for that question, and I'm actually going to give Major General Noble the floor to respond. But I think when they said they will not talk with terrorists, what the US position has been that they will not negotiate with terrorists, for instance, in hostage-taking situations and so on. But I'm quite sure that there must be backroom negotiations and so on taking place, perhaps through third parties or whatever, to get, the end result of solving your problem. But I think you raise a lot of interesting questions, and because this is a seminar at which we welcome interactive dialogue, having said this, I will pass the floor now to Major General Noble, who could perhaps explain a little bit of the US position, and then we will also ask Professor Kall to give his views. Thank you.
Is this working? Yeah. Can you hear me? So I'll be Australian for a second. Everybody complains about the United States. It's easy. It's a big, powerful nation. It's a robust democracy. It makes policy in public. It's influential on the global stage, so that's kind of natural. In specific response, I'd say two things. One is, I'm not aware of any policy that says the United States doesn't talk or have a dialogue with adversaries. What tends to happen is what the chairwoman just said, which is it's kind of case specific. So I see no one with a deep abiding desire to sit down with al-Baghdadi and have a dialogue with him. However, with other potential adversaries, states, actors, there is a dialogue. So it's kind of case specific. And the US strategy is, my experience, is not the blind application of hard power. Quite opposite. It's the application of all elements of military power in context. A lot of that is just not visible to the public, and it is not visible or reported on. But it's certainly a central idea in US thinking. And if you listen to what people like the National Security Advisor say, the Secretary of Defence, and the Secretary of State, they adopt an all elements of national power approach to a problem. One of the elements of national power is military force, and one element is the application of lethal force. And that's a component that can and be used in the pursuit of national interest. So really, I don't think the US in many ways is different to many other countries. Most countries adopt a version of that approach, and then they need to apply it in the real world. And for the US, that's a large scope and a large bandwidth of stakeholders to deal with. The last thing I'd say to you is just my personal experience last year in Iraq. The sheer amount of engagement, dialogue, effort to understand, influence and shape multiple audiences in support of the operations in Iraq and Syria is staggering. And the US leads it and tries to generate networks in which that dialogue could occur. So by no means is the US or probably any other state perfect or understand how to do it completely successfully, but it is a world leader and that is its approach.
Could I just add on that, Sarala, that I think it's a very important question to raise, that sometimes American politics disrupts or distorts these soft power processes. In fact, when the term soft power was introduced, the people who backed it had great trouble presenting it to the Senate because senators didn't want to endorse something soft. So they came up really with they found that the term smart power for a combination of hard and soft power worked better with senators because they didn't mind they didn't mind endorsing something smart. There's an element of in so much in American politics has to please the voter base, and so will be tied to, well, does this bring jobs in my district? Now, there aren't many districts that get soft power related jobs. Maybe some jobs in Hollywood, maybe some jobs in New York, but it's not one of the, whereas build an aircraft carrier and you have guaranteed jobs in a vulnerable part of the country. I think often the public diplomacy aspects, the soft power aspects of American foreign policy don't get the push from legislative politics or presidential politics that they deserve. My final point is that once we're saying these things about ourselves, making these moral claims, it is essential that we walk the walk and that we conform to the best practices we put out there. And I see no alternative but in a peace-building situation to talking to the people who are, some of the people who are your enemies you have to speak to. Maybe not everybody, but you don't make peace with your friends. As the Israeli statesman said, you know, you have to, at some point you have to, and unpleasant as it is, there are people in the enemy camp who have to become your partners for dialogue and your partners for building peace.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, up front here.
Some problem with technology. Question is for Nicholas. What is the public diplomacy content in the sequential transformation of messaging in the US policy from global war on terrorism to US commitments overseas to combating violent extremism, to combating violent Islamic extremism? That's the short question.
Thank you, and I don't know whether General Noble would like to say something on behalf of the US, but Professor, though he's not representing the US, may have a view. So Nick, I give the floor to you.
Well, if Roger doesn't mind, you know, I think that a lot of this branding is happening at the top level. It's coming from the White House. And one of the things that shocked people inside the White House was that the Bush administration would suddenly announce a brand for an important rhetorical element or narrative without talking to anybody or listening to anybody. The one that annoyed people most, annoyed the public diplomacy experts the most, was Axis of Evil, which seemed like it was a rejected topic for a Marvel comic. You know, Batman versus the Axis of Evil, or the X-Men take on the Axis of Evil. Nobody was asked about that. It was just somebody in the White House writing a speech thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to refer to the existence of an Axis of Evil? The president went with it, and suddenly everybody in the American Advocacy Network, all the way around the world, had to explain what the Axis of Evil was, why there was an equivalence suddenly between Cuba, North Korea, and Syria, and Iran, and how those countries were all... So this is a tremendous problem, a tremendous lack of coordination of message. And I see this rebranding of the message as being often about interference in politics at the highest level without listening to people who know what they're doing much lower down in the network. And it gets the United States into tremendous hot water. Sometimes they name a military operation and find that it's blasphemous. They've got into all sorts of problems by not researching their elements of their policy branding.
So,
Can I ask the question?
right, can I add something?
Yes, Major General, please.
Yeah, I think another way to look at it is words are important, but they're always the subject of debate. And who's looking at the words interprets them differently. So an example is the Iraqis really hate the term Islamic State. They do not want us to call ISIL or ISIS Islamic State. And they have two reasons. They say they are not Islamic and they are not a state. So that is a very bad term. You're actually branding on their behalf. That's just another perception of that. I heard them ask a body of Western media, why do you use that term? That's because that's what Islamic State call themselves. So that's an example about labels that, depending on what you look at and from what direction, they can mean different things. So how do we practically deal with it in the US military? Because as I said before, the US is a vibrant democracy and there's a constant debate in public about it at the highest levels. So the term we use at the moment is violent extremist organisations. And the way we deal with them is on a case-specific. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to every organisation. So we will look at each adversary, threat and environment in its context for what it is and deal with it in that situation. That's it.
I guess we are over time as always, so unless someone has a very burning question.
I'm Colonel Izzadin from Sri Lanka Army. My question is this, extremism has been long drawn out as a history. Actually, if you say when Marx, Lenin brought out communism, that when it was imposed on others, it was a kind of extremism. And when Western brought free world, and when it was imposed on the other countries, it again could call as extremism. So basically, extremism can derive from many areas, but it has been subjected or it has been bottlenecked at one single point where only the non-state actors are involved. Basically, extremism also could be called state-sponsored, where today the Korean Peninsula is staggering with the nuclear threat. So that is actually could be called state-sponsored extremism. What is your point on that?
Thank you, and this has to be the last question because you are going to suffer. You will not have enough time for coffee. So I give the floor now to the Major General, if you'd like to take that on.
Yeah,
So we can wrap up.
I mentioned in my speech that the US is working on a concept for looking to the future. And it is not adversary specific. So it is trying to encapsulate how do you deal with the reality of the 21st century and the range of adversaries that you are going to confront and how best to deal with them using all elements of power in all domains with all capabilities. It is not adversary specific. So I would say we look at each situation and each adversary on its merits and for what it is and tailor a response in accordance with our own philosophy, capabilities and doctrine to that particular threat. That's the military answer to your question. And it avoids, I know, the difficult political issues of labels about who's an extremist and who isn't, but it is our practical organisational response that we apply on a daily basis.
And what I wanted to say to finish things off is that it's really important not to assume that any one nation state is the most authoritative or effective communicator on every subject under the sun. Nobody is universally credible, and everybody should be looking to partner around communication, and not just partner with other nation states, but partner with civil society actors, partner with corporate actors, partner with powerful individuals, partner with religious voices. And through these partnerships, we can have credible dialogue and credible conversation and credible messaging around these important issues. This shouldn't just be about what the nation state says about violent extremism.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panelists who have come from near and far to be in the Colombo Defense Seminar today and to give their valuable contributions. And I think General is here to take over from me. So thank you very much.